Hello, everyone. Welcome to Opinions New by Dr. Frank Pinshi and Frank. Yeah. In this episode, I want to talk about why does the relationship, the Sino-US diplomatic relationship, deteriorate so quickly, okay? And what is happening here? Okay? I'm sure many of you, most of you have heard that today is July 30th, 31st, 2020. Right? About a week ago, the State Department, the U.S. State Department, made a decision to close the Chinese consulate in Houston, Texas. Yeah? And it demanded that the Chinese diplomats must, leave within 72 hours, 3 days, and empty the building, the consulate building in Houston. Right? And the top U.S. diplomat or Secretary of State, Pompeo, said on July 22nd that the reason the U.S. is closing Chinese consulate in Houston is because of persistent theft of American intellectual property by Beijing. Also, Pompeo said something in Denmark that what we're doing, we are setting clear expectations based on how Chinese Communists is responding. In other words, there will be subsequent actions taken depending on how China is responding to that. Okay? Of course, we know right after America closed the Houston consulate and China closed American consulate general in Chengdu in Sichuan province. Okay? There are about 60 diplomats, Chinese diplomats in Houston. And we can see that this decision by the State Department is a huge, big escalation of the tension between the two countries, two giants. Right? Of course, the news really shocked the Chinese community or Chinese community, and the Chinese foreign department, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, of course, was really mad at this. Right? And even though China responded by closing the Chengdu Consulate General in retaliation, I believe there's still more to go, much more going on between the two countries. Trump administration has said that it could close even more consulates, Chinese consulates in the U.S. So we'll see. There's something, drastic that happened, and something more drastic could be happening in the future. Right? And what we found that interesting is that Mr. Chai Wei, or the Consulate General of Houston, said that he was surprised, he was shocked to hear the news. He got news from the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C. And at the same time, when he was actually burning those documents, he was also telling people that his consulate will continue to operate. But that does not seem to be right. If you are to stay and continue to operate, why do you burn all those papers, right? The purpose, foreign documents, right? Of course, they knew that they could be expelled, so they were making those preparations. But the point is here, what people are thinking about and wondering about is, why does the U.S. government do something so drastic at this time? Why Houston? Right? And is American government violating international law or consular, treaty between the two countries by asking the whole consulate to close? Okay? And what if, because of course we know now that the Chinese diplomats moved out. What if they didn't move out? What if they refuse to move out? What would the U.S. government do? They would send in the police, FBI's, or Marines. So, and it seemed to be that what Trump said, that the U.S. is planning or is ready to close more consulates. That's almost like severing the relationship, diplomatic relationship between the two countries. Right? Is America really ready to do so? Right? That's the question that we're asking. Is there a Cold War going on between the two countries, or maybe even a hot war that follows that? And also, many people are talking about the why Houston consulate, right? And what would we roll this thing, all the events back from American standpoint of view? It is because China forbade U.S. diplomats to go back to the American consulate in Wuhan, the source of the pandemic, right? And the Chinese demanded that the U.S. diplomats had to go through this testing, isolation, and they could even, get the DNA information from American diplomats. Of course, America refused that, and therefore the Americans were not allowed to go to Wuhan consulate. And then, the Wuhan consulate general, the office is not functioning. To retaliate in kind, U.S. Could choose, one of those five consulates, general consulates in America, and stop operation in that Chinese consulate. And if you look at the geography or diplomatic equivalent, the corresponding consulate in America, Chinese consulate in America, should be Chicago. Yeah, so Chicago Consulate General in consulate in Chicago, not in Houston. But why did the U.S. government choose Houston? And remember what the Pompeo said about China stealing technologies? Yes, it's because Houston is the centers, research centers of American space technologies, energy technologies, and medical technologies. Okay? And China has a huge network of spies, to steal those technologies, systematically. Okay? They also operate a spy network involving the real spies and amateur spies, Chinese student scholars, and Chinese Native American, Chinese Americans or American Chinese. Okay? So since really the Houston is so well known for those technologies, no wonder U.S. government chose, U.S. chose Houston. It's better than Chicago, it seems to me. Okay. Now, of course, for U.S. government to declare to close foreign consulates is not the first time, right? It happened before several times, many times over the decades. But to a Chinese consulate, this is the first time. Okay? But given the tensions between the two countries, we find that's not so surprising. Okay? Similar things happened in 2017 when Russian consulate in San Francisco was asked to be closed within 48 hours. Right? And at that time, the Russian diplomats were also burning something inside the building. Right? And then the U.S., I think the local government, send a fine notice to them saying you're illegally burning those garbage and making the air quality bad. So they send a bill to them. I doubt the Russians would pay that bill. Okay? And also in 1941, just before the Pearl Harbor attack by the Japanese consulate, Japanese embassy in the United States were also burning papers, documents. And the interesting thing is when the State Department official who were announcing this closure of Houston consulate, someone from the State Department actually put the picture of the Japanese burning documents on the internet. Okay? Interesting, huh? Right? Very interesting. Right? And also in 2018, 2 years ago, America government closed the Russian consulate in Seattle, expelling 60 Russian diplomats because they were they were accused of being spies under the disguise of the diplomats. Right? The Russian spies and their families were ordered or asked to leave America in 7 days. Right? Comparatively, the Chinese diplomats got only 3 days. Okay. As to expelling Chinese diplomats, is that legal with regard to international law? Hmm? If seemed to me, if those so-called Chinese diplomats are in fact, spies, that shouldn't be a problem. Okay, and you remember that hours after the U.S. demand to close the Chinese consulate, the Chinese consulate officials actually reminded, Chinese students in America to be on alert, to be careful about unreasonable interrogation or detention. That's what they said. That could very well be a warning to their network of spies. You know. And of course, if they're deemed spies, then the U.S. could just say, hey, they declare all the Chinese officials, diplomats in Houston, they're all spies. I think they're all armed. Yeah. And then they are the persona non grata. They could be expelled. Okay? Many people were concerned about the real estate property, the building the Chinese consulate in Houston occupied, right? And it's a remember Chinese consulate in Houston has been in operation for 40 years. The building actually, I took a look at the county tax records or tax record in Harris County, Texas. Yeah. The fund is actually owned. The owner is Chinese consulate. Okay? And but someone also said that it actually was owned by Republic of China. You know what that is? Taiwan, right? Before U.S. recognized China, the Communist China, as the official representative of China. Right? And then Taiwan was deprived of their diplomatic relationship. Right? And that's why it's actually the nationalist government, the Kuomintang or KMT, or the Taiwanese government actually owned this and then turned over to Chinese government. It seems to be that's just one story, how one story goes. Right? But the thing is, now the consulate is closed. Right? The consulate is closed. Now, what about the building? It's owned by the Chinese. If they don't have any usage for that, they couldn't, they probably could not, well, also they don't know when to reopen that, or the hope is not that great. It's in distant future. They probably just have to sell the house, sell the building. Okay? But if they sell it, the buyer, probably have to do a lot of work. You think about that, there's so many things that's designed or used by the spy agency. So it's not like you can easily turn that into an office building or commercial residential. So we'll see. But it seems to be the location is not too bad. So probably won't lose money on that. Probably make some money on that. But at least a spy ring or a spy operating center is out. Okay. Many people were concerned about were many Chinese people, viewers, readers. They want to know how does American mainstream media view something like this? Yeah? Do they treat this or view this as something so critical, very important, or something not that important? Right? In fact, the American media, mainstream media, actually doesn't take that as something too important. They simply say something like, Houston, we got a problem. We got a Houston problem. Indeed, it's a Houston problem, right? And well, there are also talks about the Chinese plan or potential plan to close the consulate in Wuhan. Well, the Wuhan consulate is not working anyway. Right? And what maybe also China could threaten to close China American consulate in Hong Kong. Right? I don't think that's going to work either, because I think American government is already planning to withdraw those two locations, right? And because with what the legislation with regard to human rights issues in Hong Kong and the U.S. Government measures, it looks like the U.S. consulate in Hong Kong is selling their properties, so there could be severe. It could be a severance of the relationship between the two. Back to our topical question. Okay? Why does it? Why now? Why does the U.S. government take such a drastic measure and doing that now? Right? Why did the two sides, U.S. and China, basically, turn the face and become turn ugly in the relationship? Right? Wouldn't are one day or not one day still or in talks about the trade relationship, about having this first phase of trade relationship, and still talking about the phase two of trade relationship, right? And so why all of a sudden there's a drastic change or a deterioration of the relationship between the two? Right? Of course, U.S. Could it be the pandemic, Wuhan pandemic? The U.S. is actually questioning and is asking for investigation, but it's not really no formal accusation to the Chinese official government yet. Right? Could it be because the potential conflict in the South China Sea? But so far, it's just routine, patrolling by U.S. Navy. They haven't opened the first fire yet, first shot yet. Right? What about Taiwan issue? Or well, U.S. is gaining is helping more and more to sending more and more help to Taiwan to strengthen Taiwan's ability to defend itself, and also, but still there's no breakthrough there. Right? So, what kind of arguments or conflicts or confrontation in opinions that resulted in such a drastic action in diplomacy? Right? Obviously, there's something big, something so big as something nuclear that has been touched upon, that has been activated. Okay? So, what is the core or most critical or most untouchable issue between the two countries? Okay? We know that the Chinese government often says something like, "We have many core interests uh, or fundamental interest issues and fundamental interests, core compare." Let's see what's the word they use for this. Our hardcore interests that you cannot touch. Issue of hardcore of great interest to China. Right? Such as the Taiwan issue, Taiwan independence, South China Sea, or Xinjiang or Tibet. These are indeed restricted taboos or red lines that America cannot touch, or any other countries cannot touch or cannot cross. Right? If they do cross, then there will be big trouble. Right? But these problems are not really the most critical, most fundamental, core problems between the two. So what is the core, the most fundamental, critical issue surrounding the relationship between the two countries? Okay? And in my opinion, it's the persecution of Falun Gong, Falun Dafa. Okay? It is the issue of Falun Gong, persecution of Falun Gong, and also organ harvesting by the Chinese government. Okay? Why so? if you look at this, the persecution of Falun Gong started in 1999, in July of 1999, right? And since then, in the past 21 years, all the U.S. government, every administration, in their dealing with the Chinese, and they could talk about human rights, what they call the Taiwan independence, Xinjiang, underground Christians, Catholics, and they can talk about anything. They can criticize as long as they criticize under the table quietly, right? And they can, the two sides, U.S. and China, could still talk, and then they could still do business, as we have seen, right? But only on the issue of Falun Gong, American diplomats cannot touch. Absolutely not. Untouchable. Okay? And the Chinese government would immediately shut down if this issue is touched upon. Okay? But in July of 2020, this untouchable, or this taboo or forbidden region is broken. Okay? Becomes touchable. Okay? Of course, we know that the persecution of Falun Gong has been going on for 21 years, and worldwide, the practitioners like me, we have been fighting to ask ask the Chinese government to stop the persecution, to demand ask the government to stop persecution, as we have been asking governments all over the world to help with us our fight to stop the persecution. But on July 20th, the 21st anniversary, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo made an announcement. This is the very first U.S. government official announcement on that day, first time ever. He demanded that the Chinese communists stop the persecution of Falun Gong immediately. Okay? The persecution of 21 years is too long, and must be stopped. Right? And also Pompeo asked the Chinese government to stop all those tortures and release all those incarcerated practitioners, and the publicize, revealed information of those missing practitioners. In other words, the right lining, or the taboo, the most restricted area between the two countries that they could never touch upon, American government has made the breakthrough. Okay, so the relationship between two countries, U.S. and China, could never be the same. Okay, these two sides have, put this thing, face to face, confront each other on this fundamental human rights issue. Okay, so it seemed to me, this is actually this should come naturally, because America, the country, is built upon, our respect for human rights, and for fundamental belief in human rights, right? And the persecution of Falun Gong is really the most, severe persecution of human rights in China and in the world, right? With the persecution and live organ harvesting that's still ongoing. So now, when the U.S. government is going back to is back on track to link, human rights abuse and diplomacy, and coming on the right direction, that's when the two governments will have to face the reality, right? Is the face-off between the two. Okay? And what's coming next, we shall see. Okay, this is the end of this episode of Opinions New by Dr. Frank Tianshi. I'll talk to you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.